Hey, how's it going? I'm Links, and in this video I will show you what you need to do to completely clear the first season of the Underground Labyrinth. Now, this will not be a detailed step-by-step guide on how to clear the labyrinth itself. I've already done one such guide and posted it on my channel, so if you haven't already, go check it out. Instead, this guide will show you what you need to keep in mind when actually running the labyrinth so that you will be able to beat this and also any future iterations of the labyrinth with ease. So I suggest you watch the whole video, but if you're only interested in certain parts of it, I will leave the timestamps for the different parts in the description down below. Now, the first floor is the most important floor. On this floor, depending on your choices, you can either set yourself up for success or failure. And this is actually a good thing, as having to restart on floor 1 is not as bad as having to restart on floor 3. Now, in this guide I will go over the most important aspect that will lead you to completing the Underground Labyrinth, namely characters and by extension team composition, passives, pathing, general combat tips and tricks, and also the bosses. So, what units you pick could make or break the run for you. This is mostly important in the early stages of the labyrinth, and there are obviously a few units that are more useful than others, and what units you should pick depends on a few factors. So firstly, there are units that will help you get far into the labyrinth solely based on their own kits. These units include, for example, Summer Merlin or Red Gopher for their attack seals, Red SR Liz, Green Brawler Ban, Blue Lilia, Blue Skinny King for their heals and self-heals, Green Escanors for his debuff immunity, Chandler and Green Estarossa for their counter stance cards, Red SR Liz or Green Merlin for their Ultrosh capabilities, Red Jericho, Blue Skinny King, etc. for their CC capabilities, and also other such units which are mainly used as backline units like Ragnarok Meliodas. And even though he's an absolutely trash unit, he still works better as a backline unit than someone without a good passive. So secondly, you should pick units to help you clear specific bosses. Now, these units include, for example, against the first floor boss counter Meliodas, you can use the combination of Summer Merlin and Red Slater to completely cuck the Meliodas. You will be incapable of both stancing and attacking, and you basically got free reign on him. And if you combine them with, for example, Blue Lilia, you can also remove his ultimate gauge orbs, effectively turning Meliodas into a target practice dummy. Against the Droll boss on the second floor, you can use Green Escanor for his immunity at full ult gauge, which makes it so that he can circumvent Droll's ult seal passive. Any unit with a cleanse can also circumvent it. Blue Mono, for example, can remove Droll's buffs and taunt, making it possible to both attack him and make him take more damage, because he won't benefit from his own buffs. And you can also use Green Estarossa here, because his counter makes it so that you can land a few extra hits on Droll before he gets his ultimate off. As this also type advantage against Droll, so he'll do more damage. His ultimate also skips an enemy turn, although you do keep in mind that his commandant will reduce the damage you do. And against the final boss on floor 3, against the Meliodas, you can use the one Escanor. Is really good, and he will basically one-shot melee with his ult if you have enough ult level, and also some good passives which increase maybe your crit chance, crit damage and stuff like that. Even when taking into considerations melee's revive passive, the Escanor just completely obliterates him. Other good units are, for example, Lolly Merlin, that you can also pick up on the third floor. She can usually tank more hits from Melee because of her passive, and Melee will of course focus target her because he is type advantage against her, but he won't really be able to kill her in one turn unless he's like really lucky. And this basically allows you to rush your ults with, for example, the one Escanor. Finally, what units you should pick depends on what passives you get throughout the run. If you get an Ultrosh passive that depends on all units being on the same type or color, or different type or color, the same race, different races, etc., then you should focus on picking characters that fit into those criteria. Now, what units you actually get to pick depends on the units you have in your box, but I do think this mostly affects early floor units. For instance, in my first Labyrinth guide video, I said that you should restart the run until you get Red SR Liz. But as it turns out, this isn't possible for the majority of players, and at the time, neither I nor anyone else knew that, and I do believe I was the first one to actually upload a guide video on the Underground Labyrinth, so I never really saw what other players were able to pull on as their first units, as I was solely focused on actually making the video, recording it and editing it during the first day. Anyway, the first two summoning nodes consist of 7 Deadly Sins units as well as the Elizabeth unit. Exactly what unit, it depends on your box. However, if you don't own enough of these types of units, then the game will fill the unit pool with R units, as it does on my JP account. To my knowledge, the pool of units that you can pick from whenever you pick a unit is limited and based, at least in the early stages, on units you do own. However, what I did not know was that if you own certain units, then you will not be able to pick certain other units you also own, as they get replaced in the pool of available units. For example, if you own a blue Lizhawk, then you will not be able to pull the red SR Liz as your first unit. I do believe you will still be able to pick up the red SR Liz from the later stages on the first floor, just not as your very first unit. I'm fairly certain that this is the case, but units you get to pick from as you start the units depends solely on what units you have in your account, and the game allows you to pick what it deems to be the best of those units. So, for example, Blue Lizhawk being a SSR unit is, according to the game, better than the Red Liz being a SR unit. You can, of course, still pick units that you do not own. For instance, on my JP account, I was able to pick up Red Tarmil, even though I do not own Red Tarmil on that account. However, this was on one of the later floors, I do believe floor 2, on which I do believe that the rules on what units you can select are less strict than they are on floor 1. So what are some of the best starting units that you should aim for? Well, for the first unit, you should try to go for either Green Brawler Ban, Green Demon Meliodas, Blue Demon Meliodas, Green Giant Diane, or Red SR Liz. For the second unit, the very best option is, of course, Summer Merlin, and that is, of course, if you have her. If you don't have her, try to go for something like Red Gopher, Green Escanor, or Blue Skinny King. The third node is a little bit of a waste in my opinion to actually go for any of the units, but the fourth one has a chance to give you Red Slater, which, as I mentioned before, in combination with Summer Merlin will allow you to cheese the first floor boss. I'll go over some of the characters you should pick for the later stages later on in the video, but do know that on floor 3, like, the best unit you can pick there, in my opinion, is the one Escanor, because of his ultimate, and he can just pretty much one-shot the final boss, which is just absolutely amazing. Right, so now we'll go into the passives. Throughout the run, you'll be able to acquire passives from certain stages or from the shop. These passives can be of different rarities, ranging from SR to UR, and they give you different strengths of buffs. What passives you get to appear are completely random, at least I think they are. There could be some that are like strictly for floor 1. I know that there is a passive which increases your basic stats by 30% if you have 15,000 CC on one specific character, that oftentimes shows up on the first floor. It's sort of a waste for the first floor, but it's really good if you actually pick it up and manage to move on to the later floors, because it basically just gives you 30% increased attack and defense and HP, and that's just great. Anyway, some of the best passives you should try to get are passives that increases your ultimate move gauge by 3 if you meet a certain criteria, such as having all your frontline units be of different races or attributes, or of the same race and attribute. Other good ult-related passives include those that give you 100% crit chance if you have full ult gauge orbs. Those two in particular, in addition to the passive that gives you plus 50% crit damage, will result in a very deadly combo. Other good passives to consider are passive which increase your basic stats, your attack percent, or reduces the damage you take, as those will allow you to survive longer and it will allow you to get your ults off. There's a very clear symbiosis between the passives and the units you can pick, so you shouldn't pick passives which won't benefit your units, and you shouldn't pick units which won't benefit from the passives you already have. So the units you pick for your team should work with the passives you already have, and the passives you pick should help the units you currently have or the ones you are planning to acquire down the line. Okay, now we'll move on to pathing. It is important to consider what path you take while moving through the board. It is very easy to reach the boss on the first floor and not have enough CC to go first. If you're unable to go first, usually one of your units will die turn 1, and the boss will be able to get their ultimate off before you're able to bring them down, which will result in yet another one of your units dying. This is mostly an issue for floor 1 and for floor 3. Now, while picking the path you take, you should not focus on only reaching the hero acquisition or the passive acquisition nodes. For instance, skipping the second hero acquisition node on the first floor for the +2 awakening stars, and then grabbing the third acquisition node, as well as using your underground labyrinth fragments to get the fourth unit from the shop, will get you a greater combat class than you would otherwise be able to get, which would ensure that you go first against the green counter Meliodas boss. Do note that you get +2 levels for each battle you beat, in addition to the +10 levels you get from landing on a enhanced hero levels node, that by the time you face the final boss on the third floor, you should be level 90 plus, with 2 to 6 super awakening stars, and have a CC of at least 120,000. That is the goal, that's what you're supposed to aim for, and it is up to you to find a balanced path to actually reach it. In my other guide video, I showed you a path which would ensure that you reach level 100 and have 4 super awakening stars. This path, which I will link to the infographics in the description, ensures that minimal RNG is required from actually acquiring passives. However, if you want to take the gamble and go for the passives, do it. I actually recommend that you do it because it's so much more fun. As you could get passives on the very early stages, which will carry you all the way to the end. So it's definitely worth the gamble with the first few passive nodes. And if you get shafted, you can just reset and rerun it, as you will only have lost about 5 minutes of your time. Alright, now I'll go over some general combat tips and tricks for you to consider while moving through the board from battle to battle. So number 1, always try to top yourself up before moving to the next battle. The health of your units will carry over between battles, so it's always a good idea to try to heal your most injured units as much as possible before clearing a battle. If you have healing units, use your heals while you attack, seal or stun the final enemy, and stall for a few extra turns until all your units are topped up. Or attack with the most injured unit so that they lifesteal as much as possible. If the injured unit, for example, has their ultimate and also 1 extra attack card against the final enemy, use the attack card first and then the ultimate, so you maximize the amount of healing you'll receive. Unless of course you think the attack card will kill, then ult them, because that will ensure that you healed as much as possible. Now this goes without saying, but control your enemies as much as possible. Use attack seals, debuff, disable, stun, freeze, petrify, seal their ults, remove their ult gauges, make the NPCs quit the game. Number 3, rush your ults. Whether you pull the ult rush passive or not, always try to get your ults. Not only will it make the battles faster, it will also make it so you take less damage in the long run. A lot of passives you can acquire are centered around your ultimate moves or how many ult gauge orbs you have, so try to get one of your ults up as fast as you can by focus attacking with 1 unit exclusively. And finally, number 4, focus down specific units. Is an enemy close to getting their ult? Just kill them. Or you type advantage against an enemy unit, that's an easy kill. And you know, the more enemies you kill, the fewer cards they'll be able to use. And also focus down the annoying units that put up shields, use debuffs and stuff like that. Why let the enemies be toxic when you can be toxic? Alright, now we're down to the final aspect you need to have some knowledge on, and that is the bosses. The bosses in this game mode hit hard. Fighting the bosses is basically a race against time. You want to kill them as fast as possible before they wipe you out. And with the exception of the first floor boss, the other 2 are immune to all debuffs, so you'll need to implement different tactics for each boss, and just going unga bunga big PP DPS on them won't necessarily work. So what exactly do you need to keep in mind when facing the bosses of the underground labyrinth? Well, you need to set your team up in such a way that it will counter whatever mechanic the different bosses have. And for that, you first need some knowledge of the bosses. So for example, on floor 1, you're up against green counter Meliodas, who has a single target attack card and also a counter stance card. You need 30,000 CC or higher to be able to go first. So what can you actually do to counter him? Well, by using Summer Merlin and Red Slater, as I've mentioned before, you can ensure that you cannot be attacked on the first turn and that Meliodas won't be able to put up their counter for 2 turns. If you don't have Summer Merlin or aren't able to get Red Slater, there are of course other units which work as well. Red Gopher can rank up and also attack seal, which is really good. And then there are units such as Blue Nunchuck Ban, Green Giant Diane, Camilla Blue Mono and Green SR Hauser, which are able to remove stances. And these are also units that you can acquire throughout floor 1 leading up to the Counter Meliodas boss. Ban and Diane specifically can be acquired as your very first unit, so you can just keep rerolling until you get them as a contingency just in case you don't pull reds later. Of course, getting the Ultra's passive within the 3 to 4 possible nodes on the first floor, including the shop, should make this boss fight super easy. Anyway, so on the second floor you will be facing Blue Droll, and to actually go first you need somewhere between 70 to 75,000 CC. I've never actually had below 75,000 CC, so I'm not sure what the exact numbers are. But about the boss himself, he essentially has Green Droll's passive and commandment, and he also has Blue Droll's taunt with Green Droll's single target attack, I believe. And with the passive from Green Droll, he will ult seal you for 2 turns if you get your ultimate gauge to max, and his commandment will apply a resistance buff to himself, and maybe you as well. But rushing your ults only works if you have Green Escanor or a unit with a cleanse card such as Blue Lilia or Blue Skinny King. Otherwise, you could try using a unit like Estarossa to counter Droll's attack for some extra damage dealt, or perhaps even Blue Mono to remove Droll's accumulated buffs and taunt, which will ensure that you deal a little bit more damage to him. Having 1 or 2 of your characters die during the first and second floor bosses doesn't really matter that much, as you will be able to resurrect one of your fallen units at the beginning of the very next floor, so don't be too afraid if 1 or 2 of your units die. And finally, on floor 3 you'll be facing Visel Meliodas, you know, the one where he loses control after having been trapped in the Goddess Crystal or whatever. You need at least 120,000 CC to go first on this fight. So what does this Meliodas do? Well, he has 2 single target attack cards. The first attack card applies a Ignite debuff to one of your units, and the other attack card applies a Infect to one of your units. And anytime he attacks you, he removes 1 ultimate move gauge orb from the unit that's being attacked. And let me tell you, he hits like a truck. 2 to 3 attacks is enough to kill off any one of your units. Additionally, he will gain an attack buff anytime you attack him. He also has a revive passive where he will revive with 20% health when he is killed. So rushing your ults by moving your cards is your best bet here. Fortunately, you are able to pick up the one Escanor as from the second character selection node on the 3rd floor. Ulting with Escanor usually does the trick for me. And if you have some ult levels on him or some nice damage providing passives, you will be able to kill the final boss in 1 hit with his ult alone. Anyway, that was some tips and tricks on what you need to think about when running the first season of the Underground Labyrinth. I hope you found this guide helpful. You can also check out my other video where I included an easy to follow pathing of how you can clear it. I'll link to it as well as the infographics in the description down below. And while you're down there, hit the like button and do consider subscribing for more Grand Cross guides and videos. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments down below and I'll attempt to answer them to the best of my abilities. But anyway, that's it for this video. Hope you have a wonderful day, thanks for watching, and I guess I'll catch you in the next one. Bye!